Hey guys, the video that you're about to watch was originally part of a larger project by the apologetics group, The Mentionables. I've merely taken my part of the project and put it together for my audience. However, I strongly suggest you go check out the gang at The Mentionables. Lots of really good stuff there. Just to let you know, I'll put a link down below so you can go check them out. I'll also put timestamps to the individual questions and challenges presented in this video. If you like this kind of content and would like to see more of it, let me know down in the comments. Be sure you like, you subscribe, all that fun stuff. Share it out, let people know. It's important that Christians understand there are answers to the questions, the doubts, and the challenges of Christianity. And this is just one way that I am hoping to help you see those answers, engage this material, and see that Christianity stands against the scrutiny. Hey there, my name is Pastor Mark Lambert from Liberty Hill Baptist Church in Moody, Texas, and I'm going to try to answer these questions that are presumably unanswerable. See, often apologetics is viewed as a means to ideologically do battle with unbelievers or people of different views. Or often they're tied in with evangelism, that apologetics, making a case for Christianity, is a way that we help unbelievers to come to see the truth of Christianity. And often those certainly are right, good, proper uses of apologetics. However, as a pastor, my larger focus in terms of apologetics has more to do with helping my congregation, helping Christians, wherever you may be, to understand that it's okay to question, it's okay to doubt, it's okay that whenever you encounter these crises of faith, that whenever you come across something you're not sure of, it's okay, and that answers are out there, that doubt is not a dirty word. I've heard a lot of testimonies over the years from people who have been in churches where doubt was a dirty word, where you're not allowed to question, where questions are actually met with disdain or met with anger, where they have been told the very fact that you're questioning shows you don't believe, that you have some kind of lack of faith and you're not really following Jesus. But it's my hope to be able to show Christians that it's okay to have doubts and questions. We all do. But as believers, we should not allow those doubts and those questions to push us away from God. They're not an excuse to run from Him, but rather we should press more into God, seeking answers, because answers are there to be found. And when we do that, it's like a little kid who's scared of the monster in his room, but when you turn on the light, you see, oh, it was just the laundry piled in the corner. There's no monster there at all. And whenever we pull back the curtain and we examine these questions and we look at things, we tend to find out, okay, there actually was no boogeyman to begin with. These are not reasons for me to doubt. These should not be things that rattle my belief. And so with that in mind, my approach as I try to answer these questions is going to be from the mindset of if it were one of my congregants asking. If it's a fellow believer who's saying, Pastor, I'm struggling to have this question, or a friend challenged me, I don't know what to say, and I'm really confused. So how would I answer a believer who is asking these questions? I'm not here to fight with atheists. I want to approach this from the standpoint of a believer who maybe has some doubts or who is questioning. When it comes to these, as we peel back the layers, as we look at what's going on, we'll see that as we turn the lights on, there's no boogeyman. The truth reveals, and it's not as scary as we thought.
If God is going to be posited for an explanation for human existence, then by what mechanisms, meaning by what activities and interactions that are organized in such a way that produced humans, did God use? And by what means could we discover those mechanisms?
This first question is kind of strange, actually. I thought, well, okay, if you were to come to me and ask, I know that we are supposed to believe that God created the world, but how did He do it? Right? If you're struggling with belief because you don't know how it is that God created the world? Here is my answer to the question of how did God do it? What mechanism did he use and how can we identify that mechanism? My answer is, I don't know. And I don't care. And that might sound a little glib. I'm not trying to be. But here's the thing. Though it's not stated in this question, kind of the assumption that is built in here is this implication that if you don't know how something works or how it came to be, then you should not believe it. But we don't actually use that way of thinking anywhere else in our life. Right? That is what's called an argument from ignorance. You don't know, therefore you shouldn't believe. Well, hold on. Just because you don't know doesn't mean it's not true. So you have to look at other things to see whether or not there is justification for the belief, even if you don't have this knowledge over here. And so the assumption that's being made is that if you don't know how something came to be, then you shouldn't believe that it is true. But stop and think about if we were to use that reasoning in other areas of life. Right? Do you understand internal combustion? Some of you probably do. You're probably mechanics and it just makes sense to you. Right? I pop the hood. I have no idea what I'm looking at. I mean, I can kind of identify that's the battery, right? I think that's the alternator over there. You know, here's where I check the oil. That's about it. I don't understand what's going on in there or why it works or how it works. Or as I'm driving down the street and that computer, I don't know how that works, but it's maintaining and controlling everything to make sure it's all working properly. I don't understand how all that works. Does that mean I shouldn't drive a car? Well, of course not. Right? And hey, if you've ever flown in a plane, do you understand the laws of aerodynamics and all the principles that work in there to make that plane lift and fly and keep you safe? No, I don't understand how all that works, so should I just not fly planes? Well, that doesn't make sense either. See, there's all kinds of things where we don't know the how, we don't know the mechanism. But that doesn't mean we're not justified in trusting in, believing in that something is the case. Right? Long before people understood planetary rotation and orbiting the sun and how all that works, we still knew the sun came up in the east to set in the west. Well, okay, so if you don't understand about planetary rotation, should you just not believe the sun is coming up in the east? No, you have good reason to believe the sun is coming up in the east, because look, there it is. And so just because you don't understand the mechanism is not a reason to doubt the conclusion. You could have entirely other reasons to believe that something is true. Likewise, when it comes to God, when it comes to believing that God created the universe, if you have good reason to believe there is a creator, and you look over here, there is a creation, how did this creator make this creation come about? I don't know. But I have good reason to believe there's a creation. I have good reason to believe there's a world and it's there and I live in it. And then I have good reason to believe there's a creator, that there's a God that exists that made the world. How did he do it? I don't know. It'd be really cool to know. Right? I'm naturally a curious person. I want to know how things work. I'm the kind of kid that would just take things apart to figure out how they work. I usually didn't figure out how they worked and I couldn't put them back together again, but that's besides the point. There's nothing wrong with wanting to seek knowledge, wanting to seek information. However, don't base what you determine to be true based on your curiosity not being satisfied. Rather, you look at what you actually do have, and does that reach the conclusion? We have reason to believe there's a creator. We know there's a creation. We live in it. We're part of it. Okay, so we know there's a creator. We know there's a creation. How did he do it? You know, even if that's not satisfied, you're still justified in accepting the evidence for the creator and the creation.
Among even the most fundamentalist of Christians, there are always people who interpret some part of the Bible metaphorically. Like in the book of Job, they talk about the four corners of the earth. Even fundamentalist Christians, for the most part, interpret that as metaphorical because we know there are no four corners of the earth. So when we find something in the Bible that doesn't necessarily reflect fact when interpreted literally, how can we definitively tell that that was intended to be interpreted metaphorically and not literally and is actually a falsehood?
How do you tell which parts of the Bible are literal or which parts are figurative? Now, while it's true that as believers, we accept that the Bible is a special book. It's revelation from God. It's divinely inspired. It's inerrant. All these things that we do accept and believe about it, it doesn't change the fact that it is still a book. Right? It doesn't alter that it was written by men with their frame of reference, their historical context, their cultural context, their literary way of writing and thinking. So God got his message communicated through the devices of men writing. So in one way, it really is a very human book. And so how do you understand how it is that you should read and interpret Scripture? How do you know whenever it's being literal or figurative? Well, you kind of have to do the same thing you do with anything, right? Any writing that you are reading, you interpret. You understand the cultural, historical context that it is written in. You understand the different styles of literary genre and devices, right? So as you're reading the newspaper, you're not having to go through a process to figure out what here is literal and what is figurative, because you swim in the same ideological ocean as the author did who wrote that newspaper or that novel you're reading or that nonfiction book you're reading. And to us, if we've gained a basic understanding of reading comprehension, as we read things in the modern world, we automatically do the things that are necessary to make the determination between literal and figurative. We automatically recognize analogy and literary devices and such. And all of this is going on in your mind as you read automatically. Right? You've grown up over time developing the skills and understanding necessary to make these determinations in modern writings. Well, the Bible's the same way. The only difference is the cultural and historical context, literary context, is removed from our usual understanding. So there's some things that are going to take a little bit more study, a little bit more understanding, a little bit more work. It's not going to come quite as automatic. A lot of it will, because humanity, even though we have different cultures, haven't always changed all that much, right? People are still people after thousands of years, but there may be some different distinctions of idioms or cultural references or just kind of ways that people viewed things that are a little bit different. And so, yes, there are parts of the Bible that take a little bit more work to understand because we're centuries, if not millennia, removed from the people who did the writing. So we determine in the Bible what's literal and what is figurative based on standard reading comprehension determinations of genre and literary device. The only difference is when we do it normally, it comes natural because it's in readings that are in the same cultural context that we walk in. Now, the Bible might take a little bit more work, but it's done exactly the same way.
What are your reasons for not being a Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist, or follower of one of the many other non-Christian faiths? Is it because you've devoted enormous time and energy to systematically investigating and debunking all these other religions? If you haven't done this, how can you in all honesty claim that your religion is superior? And if you're only a Christian because you happen to have been born into a Christian family, or you were raised in a culture or society where Christianity is commonplace, what about all the other people who, by a twist of fate, have been raised believing one of the many other religions that God has allowed to proliferate?
If you have good reason to believe that something is true, you don't need to exhaustively examine every other possible alternative in order to be confident in the truth of that one thing. Right? You're justified in your acceptance of your belief based on the evidence you have, not just because other alternatives might be possible. See, what's helpful as you determine what is true and what to believe, there's kind of three stages, or four, I guess you could say. There's what is possible, which is virtually anything. Anything that's not a logical contradiction is possible, but what's plausible? I mean, what actually makes sense that it could be the case? But out of the things that are plausible, not everything that could conceivably be the case isn't necessarily the case. So what's most probable to be the case? And so just because there's a lot of possible things doesn't mean they're probable. And so you don't necessarily have to study everything in order to be convinced, justified, convinced of the one thing that you believe. See, there's also this case that every belief system kind of falls into broad categories, things like theism or pantheism or deism or materialism, right? These just broad categories that share some very basic fundamental ideas. Like pantheism shares the idea that God is the universe is God. There is no difference. I mean, so whenever you look at a chair, a tree, a building, a cloud, those are all we are all part of God. That's what pantheism would teach. Well, if you have good reason to believe that the God and the universe can't be one and the same, well, then any view that holds to that idea can't be true. So rather than having to go through and do a broad, deep investigative study of a bunch of pantheistic religions to see if one of them might be true, if pantheism itself is eliminated, everything in that category isn't going to be true. And so it's okay to not have to do a deep investigative study of every single religion out there. I mean, we wouldn't use this in other areas of life. I mean, are you married? Right? Do you have a spouse? Are you interested in having a spouse? Right, well, there's 4 billion other people on the face of the planet that could potentially be your spouse. Do you have to go investigate every single one of them in order to know this one person is right for you? No, we wouldn't think that way. Right? I mean, do you drive a car? How do you know which car is going to be right for your needs and your situation? Did you go test drive every other car on the planet? No. Right? You took the evidence you had with what was in front of you, made the conclusion based on rational, logical, figuring, or maybe just whatever you could afford. But the point is, you don't have to test every possible alternative to come to a conclusion about a single idea. Now, regarding this idea of other people who are raised to believe other religions, well, like anyone else, they have their cultural and personal biases. We all have them. Right? And so they filter their worldview through that cultural and personal bias. Just as I'm sure I have mine, and there's things that I firmly believe that I'm probably wrong on, because I'm filtering it through a view of the world that is maybe a little skewed. Right? It's that idea that when you look through water, right, the stick looks bent, but it's not really, even though, it distorts it. Our world, our view, our biases can distort our view of things. And so, just like there's probably things I perceive wrongly, right? We all make such mistakes. So if we all have these biases, why should I believe that their biases are leading them wrong, but mine are okay? Well, I do all that I can, like anyone does. All you can do is all you can do, and you do everything you can to eliminate your biases and try to follow the evidence and the reason and rationality as best as you can to come to the right conclusion. And that's all you can do. That's all any of us can do, is try to do your best to eliminate your biases, to see the world as it really is, and then you are reasonably justified to accept that something is true if you've done your due diligence and you've come to a conclusion and you've said, this is where the arguments and evidence lead. You're okay. But what about these other people? What about them? Deal with what's in front of you. And if you don't have reason to doubt, if you don't have reason, just the existence of other ideas are not reasons to doubt yours. And so you don't have to exhaustively study every other religion in the world to know that Christianity is true. Just do your best that you can to eliminate your bias and examine the evidence that you have. And if it leads you to believe that Christ is indeed the Son of God risen from the dead, then accept that.
Kyle asked me to come up with a question for Christians. I had a really hard time choosing just one. I mean, much of the Bible makes no sense at all, but I wanted to choose a question that really gets to the heart of the religion, and one that would apply to most, if not all, Christians, no matter their denomination. And so I decided to go with the supposed resurrection of Jesus Christ and the reason why he had to die in the first place. Here's my question. Why would an omnipotent, all-powerful God need a human sacrifice in order to forgive people their sins? If this being is truly capable of doing anything, has unlimited power and resources, and is all-loving, why would it require a brutal torture and killing? Why would it need a blood sacrifice and not just simply forgive people their sins? Especially if it knew their motivations and could judge people according to their intentions. This question has always baffled me, even when I was a Christian. Anyhow, thanks for inviting me to take part in this video, Kyle.
So the question is, why couldn't God just forgive people? Why does there have to be sacrifice? Why does human sacrifice have to take place? Why did Jesus need to die in order for us to be forgiven? Couldn't God just forgive us? I mean, you're right, he's the God of the universe. All powerful, unlimited resources. Snap his fingers, done. Well, he didn't have fingers, but you get the point. Why couldn't he just forgive? Forgiveness is not that simple. Oftentimes we tend to think it is because the slights against us that we forgive aren't that big of a deal. But the thing is, all forgiveness has a cost. Right? A wrong has been done, something has been violated, trust has been broken, money's been stolen, property's been broken. Something has happened that has damaged something that now needs to be mended, and that mending requires a cost. Right? When you forgive someone for their debt, for their damage, for their offense, the price is still being paid. The only difference is you are the one who is paying it. Years ago, I had some roommates, and there were about three or four of us, and we had a house, but I had an opportunity to go live somewhere else rent-free, good opportunity for me in college, and so I took it, and like a dummy, because I was young, I left things in my name. Well, fast forward about 6 months, and I'm getting calls, and I'm getting bills, and I'm getting the landlord saying, hey, I'm kicking these people out, they're not paying rent. But that house is in my name. And so here I am, where I have some friends, people I care about, I've known for years, who now have me on the hook for around the tune of $6,000. Well, okay, I had the money, so I paid the rent, and I paid the bills and everything, settled all that. But the fact is that, well, I'm out $6,000 and they owe me. Those were their bills. That was their debt. They owe me the money they promised to pay and they didn't pay it. After a while, I just forgave it. I just said, you know what? Forget it. I got it. But here's the thing. I'm still out $6,000. I still had to pay that money. Right? I'm a 21-year-old college kid. $6,000, that's a lot of money for me. So the cost was still taken on by me. What if you have a friend who breaks something? Right? Well, one time, a friend of a friend comes over, they sit down in a chair, break the chair. They didn't apologize. They didn't offer to replace it. Right? They just sat down, were goofing off, and broke my chair. Now I'm out of chair, I have to replace a chair. Well, I forgave them, but I still have to replace the chair. The cost was still there. See, forgiveness has cost. Right? And so we have committed an offense against God. We have used his stuff, stolen his, whatever way you want to view that. We are indebted to God. And so he can't just snap his fingers and make it go away. There is a cost that must be borne in order for forgiveness to take place. God has to take that on himself, right? There's still the matter of this transgression that we've committed. So he can't just, snap his fingers and it's all away. No, there's still the debt that has to be handled. And the thing is that God is just and fair. He's just and fair. So it would actually be unfair and unjust to let someone get away with habitually stealing, misusing, and breaking your stuff. Let's say, for instance, that let's say you got more money than Bill Gates, but you've got a friend who's always coming over without asking, and just invites himself over, makes use of your stuff, eats the food in your fridge, breaks your toys, borrows money from you and never pays it back, and on and on and on, repeatedly. At some point, it doesn't matter that you've got more money than Bill Gates. At some point, it's like, okay, you're abusing me. You are mistreating me. You're using my stuff in my house taking me for granted and mistreating me. It's not an issue of the money. You could easily just pay them, whatever, okay, they broke a chair, they broke whatever, they threw their Nintendo controller through my flat screen, well, whatever, I got more money than Bill Gates, I can pay for it. No, at some point, it's not about the money. It's about the mistreatment. And so it is with God. We live in His world, right? We breathe His air, we eat His food, we use His stuff, and we use that breath He gave us to curse Him. We misuse the other people He's created, harm them, hurt them, mistreat them. Right? That we live a life that He gave us and we're abusing it. It's on loan from Him, but we're misusing it. It's His property, not ours. And so over and over again, at some point, it doesn't matter that He's all-powerful, has all the resources, unlimited, that He could just, make it go away. We're mistreating Him. We're like the friend who's eating all your food and breaking all your stuff and borrowing money without paying you back. It's not about the stuff, it's not about the food, it's not about the money, right? And so it is with us and God. So in order for Him to forgive, He pays the cost of what we have damaged. And because He is just and fair, He's not a pushover, and so the cost has to be paid. Problem is we can't pay it. Problem is that we cannot pay it. Now, the cost is obvious whenever we're talking about things like money or property damage, but whenever you start to get into the more abstract ideas like, moral transgressions and sin, it may not be quite as obvious, but the idea is still there. So take that idea from the debt, from the money, from the damage, and how forgiveness has a cost. Now translate it over into the idea of sin and moral transgression. Essentially, by our sin, what we are doing is we are using, abusing, and breaking God's stuff. His creation, His house, His rules. We're abusing Him. We're rebelling against Him. We're saying, forget you. Thank you for your stuff. Go away. Right? If someone was treating you like that, it wouldn't matter how much money you had. They're in the wrong. They need to pay. And the Bible says that the payment due for our sin is death. Romans 6, the wages of sin is death. What you have earned is death. That's the payment. That's what needs to be given to make up for what you have done. Right? If you break my window, what you need to pay me to make up for that window is the money for the cost of the window. Now, what we have stolen from God is life. It's His life. He created us. He gave us our life. He I'm going to use the word gave. It kind of makes it sound like, well, here, cheers, do whatever you want with it. It's His. It's on loan from Him. We kind of owe it to Him, but we took it. So what we owe is life for life. So why does it have to be so bloody? I mean, why does Jesus have to go through getting beaten and put on a cross? Why in the Old Testament does it have to be like bulls and lambs and goats and stuff? Why the blood? Why the brutality? Why can't He just be like, boom, okay, done, paid? I think that one thing we get wrong is the nature of sin. We tend to misunderstand the seriousness of sin and what it is. So one of the things that we are shown through both the sacrificial system in the Old Testament and the sacrifice of Jesus in the New Testament is the seriousness of, the seriousness of sin. See, a lot of times we don't take sin seriously. We think, what's the big deal? Okay, I made a mistake. But to God, who, by the way, is the one who defines right and wrong, to God, whenever He says, that's a big deal. Imagine you're watching with a coworker, you're at work, maybe, you're one of the most places to have a lobby with a TV, or whatever. You're with someone, you're watching the news, and it's the latest school shooting, and the person next to you goes, what's the big deal? It's just a few kids. You'd be appalled. How dare you say that? What do you mean, just a few kids? This is horrible. It's horrific. It's tragic. Look at this. It's appalling. Likewise, whenever we say to God, what's the big deal? Just a little sin, right? It's just a little lie. It's no big deal. Well, to God, it's just like you looking at your friend who said, what's the big deal? Just a few dead kids. do you mean just a few dead kids? In the same way, when we say, what's the big deal with sin? No. Part of the reason why sacrifice is needed, why it's so bloody, is because the seriousness of sin. And it stands as a reminder. Look at what your sin cost. Look at how tragic your sin is. And it's an example of the seriousness of sin. And this last comment in this question about our motives. You know, as a Christian, like I said, I'm trying to answer these as if I'm addressing Christians. And as a Christian, the whole reason you came to Christ was because you're a sinner. Because you know you're a sinner and you need forgiveness. And you know the intentions of your mind and your heart. This is one of those things that, well, God knows my intentions. Yes, He does know your intentions. And that should not comfort you. That should terrify you. An example I often will give, and I got it from somewhere else, but it's useful. I'll often use it as an example in my congregation. I'll say, okay, let's imagine that we could put a microchip or something in your brain and record all of your thoughts, all of your private, innermost conversation that you're having with yourself for just one day. And then we're going to invite all of your friends and family, your mom, your grandma, right? Your little kid sister, and we're just going to put it up on a screen and let them see your intentions and your thoughts and the internal conversation going on in your head. Do you want to be in that room? Most are absolutely going to say no. No, because we know. You know what's in your head. You know what's in your thoughts. Your intentions? Oh, God should forgive me because He knows my intentions. Yes, He knows your intentions. That should be an occasion for fear, not an occasion for comfort.
A variety of religions, from ancient Greek beliefs to Native American beliefs, both past and current, account for gods that have relationships with their believers and with their servants. Why do you feel like the relationship that you claim to have with Jesus Christ is somehow special or unique and somehow invalidates how all other believers feel about their gods and their connections with their gods?
So the idea here is that other religions have gods that claim some kind of relationship with their believers, right? And how is this relationship then with Jesus unique? You know, why is it different than all these other relationships with all these other gods? Well, the defining characteristic is the fact that Jesus is real. But that's what it comes down to. The issue we have to consider is not whether or not someone's feelings of their relationship with their God is valid. I don't know what that means for a feeling to be valid. A feeling is valid, it seems to me, if it accurately reflects reality. Right? If somebody says something to you and you misunderstand what they said and you get angry, is your anger valid? No, because you're mad for no reason. Nothing actually happened for you to be angry about. It's an invalid emotion. Stop feeling that way. It's no big deal. You misunderstood. Here's what I really meant. Oh, okay, I'm sorry, my bad. Right? It's not a valid feeling because it's not grounded in reality. So obviously, as a Christian, I believe that Jesus is real. He's a real person, a real historical figure for whom we have historical evidence for His life, His death, His burial, and yes, I believe His resurrection. But that's a whole other conversation. And the relationship that I have with Christ is real, regardless of how I feel about it at any given time. Right? Just like my relationship with my wife, just because I may not, maybe we go through a slump. Maybe it's just one of those periods of time where we're so busy, we're just kind of like ships passing in the night, we just don't really feel like there's much of a relationship anymore. What does it matter how I feel? I'm still married. She's still my wife. And in the same way, your feelings about the relationship don't actually determine the truth or validity of the relationship. The truth of a religion is not determined by how you feel. It's determined by the facts. It's determined by the evidence, by what is actually true. What invalidates these other religions, these other relationships, is the fact that they are based on things that are not true. These gods do not exist. So just because, and this is, I think this is really where it gets down to as a Christian, just because some people who have these other beliefs seem to feel the same way you do, that they seem to, it's like, well, they seem to have a relationship with their God that is, sometimes even looks more real than my relationship with my God. Well, rather than determining truth based on your feelings or the seeming of what you see in someone else, examine the evidence. Look at what is actually true and what is real rather than feelings. Feelings are useful. Feelings kind of help us sometimes when you're scared. That's a feeling that lets you know, uh-oh, there's something to watch out for. Right? When you're angry, that's a feeling that lets you know, hey, I have been wronged. This needs to be addressed. But feelings can lie. Right? Anyone who's been around a 15-year-old girl who was in love knows that feelings can lie. Right? And so just because you feel something doesn't mean it's true. Actually examine what is the truth of the matter. And the reason that we can say, I have a relationship with Christ that is real and true and these others are not is because Christ is real and true. These other guys don't actually exist.
In the Old Testament, God didn't like all the unrighteous people on earth. So why did God choose to get rid of all of them with a global flood? Presumably, he could have made them painlessly vanish with a silent snap of his immaterial fingers. And why, after flooding the whole earth, did God decide to hide all evidence of his act?
So here we have ourselves presented with a question about the flood. Two things that really get mentioned here that need understanding is that last little comment thrown in about why did God hide the evidence. This is a misunderstanding on the nature of evidence. Evidence is just information. Everyone has access to all the same evidence. Whenever creationists argue about a global flood, they're not talking about this special category and group of facts that they have that no one else has. And whenever other scientists look and they say that there was no global flood, they don't have their own special pool of facts. Think of a court case. That people, you have the prosecution, you have the defense, and they have all the same evidence, right? The prosecution doesn't have all the guilty evidence, and the defense have all the not guilty evidence. They have all the exact same evidence, they just approach it from a different view. This one from the view of guilt, this one from the view of not guilt, and then they argue a case to see which one best fits the evidence. So this notion of no evidence is just simply false. It's a matter of interpreting the evidence that everyone has access to. But that is a different issue that we cannot address in this short of a video. Another thing that needs to be remembered is that the flood was not God just getting rid of people he didn't like. The issue was justice being served on a wicked mankind. This was judgment. This was the holy, righteous, sovereign creator of the universe dishing out justice upon the guilty. Okay, fine, maybe that is the case, but why did he have to do it in such a violent and painful means? Well, it's speculation, but I think there are a few possible answers. One is it demonstrates the seriousness of sin, the seriousness and extremity of the consequence reflects the seriousness of the offense. And there is the fact that it would serve as a warning to future generations. If he were to just, say poof and everybody's gone, then you wouldn't have this kind of remaining monument of judgment being done to look back at and say, this is what happens to wickedness run amok. And so we need to restrain our wickedness, our immorality, because look at what happened there. God judges sin and takes it very seriously. But I think there's this deeper issue going on here that's being assumed in the question. And it's this idea that if it hurts, it must be bad. That all pain is evil. That morality is based on whether or not something causes pain or suffering. But I don't think that's correct. I don't think it's biblical. So if you're going to critique Christianity based on an idea that would be false, if Christianity is true, It's just not going to work. This is what would be called an internal critique, where you say, oh, well, that would be wrong of God to do that, but if God exists and the Bible's true, it's not wrong for God to do it. Here's the thing. Pain by itself does not make something immoral. There's all kinds of things that might hurt, might cause some pain that we don't consider immoral. There are plenty of cases where pain itself is actually part of the healing and restoration process, whether it is physical or emotional. Right? If someone has an injury and they're having to relearn how to walk, okay, that physical therapy is not fun. It is not pleasant. There is pain. There is struggle. There is hardship as you go through it, but the end result is healing and restoration. Right? If you have to have infection or a tumor or something cut out, there's pain involved in that, but it is a healing process. Right? Emotional and psychological wounds that as you need to heal and restore, you have to face up to some unpleasant things to wrestle through them, and that process can be unpleasant. It can be painful to go through. So pain by itself does not define something as being immoral or as being wrong. So the question we have to ask ourselves whenever it comes to the flood is not, was there pain, but why did this happen the way it did? And as already mentioned, we have to remember this is an act of judgment. Right? This isn't supposed to be pleasant. Right? They haven't earned some kind of cushy little reward or nice, soft, kitty glove handled situation. This is deep, systemic wickedness of mankind that God has now determined deserves punishment. Right? We don't expect prison to be a vacation because it's punishment. Right? Justice is being served. You're not supposed to enjoy it. You did a bad thing. You're not supposed to have fun while you're in jail. It's that same way. Punishment, justice, being served is not supposed to feel good. It's actually a fairly common understanding that no, you're in trouble. You've done wrong. You don't deserve to feel good about it, and that you are delivered pain because of your guilt is actually justice being served. And so if God is to judge the world in such a way that they experience pain in the sentencing, he's not doing anything wrong. That's perfectly legitimate. And so rather than thinking that God judging the world is wrong because there was pain involved, what we really need to look at is the fact that God did judge the world, because sin is a serious thing that we may not take seriously, but God does. And so we need to look at that experience of judgment and let it be a wake-up call to the reality of sin and its seriousness.
Why is it that the believers in every religion in history were wrong about their respective religion, despite having the same amount of conviction and evidence as you do for Christianity? It seems to me that you're already an atheist when it comes to all other religions in history, but somehow the one you happen to be born into is the one correct one.
Now with this question, there actually appears to be three questions in the one, at least that I'm seeing. You have this issue of believing something just because you're born there. You have this issue of religion based on conviction. And then you have this issue of kind of just Christianity is just like all the other religions. Why should you possibly think that yours is right and theirs is wrong? And so just to kind of address each of these in turn, not take too much time on them, but these are actually things that really are no reason to doubt. They're no reason to disbelieve Christianity, even though in some circles they seem to be considered fairly deep and problematic issues. They're really not. So being born somewhere, you just believe your religion because that's where you were born. Right? In America, you're probably Christian. Right? In the Middle East, you'd probably be Muslim. If you're in India, you'd probably be Hindu. Right? If you're over in China, somewhere in Southeast Asia, you might be Buddhist. Right? It's just an accident of where you're born, and that's why you believe. Well, okay. But what follows from that? What actually follows from that in regards to whether or not Christianity is true? So I was born into a Christian family, raised in a predominantly Christian culture where I was taught to believe in Christianity. What does that have to do with whether or not Christianity is actually true? Exactly zero. That doesn't tell us one bit at all whether or not Christianity is true. The fact is, we're born into cultures that believe maybe some true things, maybe some false things. There's certainly things that I have in common with my atheist neighbors in America that I'm sure they believe are absolutely true. Right? We happen to be born into a culture that values human rights and an individual dignity and privacy and freedom of speech. And if we were born somewhere like Saudi Arabia or communist China, those things may not be the case. See, but we would look at that and say, oh, but it's true that we have human rights, and isn't it fortunate that we were born somewhere that accepts that truth? Thank goodness I'm not born somewhere else where that is denied. Okay, now wait a minute. You just happen to be born somewhere where these things, well, maybe they're not really true. Oh, no. We believe they're true. Okay, so that's the whole point, right? Thank goodness I was born somewhere that values human rights. Okay, well, thank goodness I was born somewhere that accepts the truth of Christianity. Right, so the issue isn't where you're born. The issue is this belief actually true? Now, the second issue wrapped up in here, it mentions, these other people who are born other places have these different religions, and they have just as strong convictions as you do. Hey, I'll admit that. There are very devout, very sincere, very convinced and convicted believers of other religions. Maybe they're even more convicted, more devout than I am. But the devotion of a believer tells you nothing about the belief. It actually addresses nothing about whether or not the thing they believe is true. It doesn't tell you about the religion. It just tells you about the believer. Right? And so the conviction and the devotion of the believer is a comment about the believer, not about the religion. People can be sincerely devoted to things that are not true. Right? You can be convinced of and convicted of things that are false. And so just the fact that other religions are as convicted, or maybe even more, than Christians still has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not Christianity is true. And then you have this issue of how Christianity kind of stacks up against other religions. You get this claim that atheists just believe in one less God, that I am an atheist to all these other gods, then they just go one step further and just believe in this God. Here's the problem with that idea. There's all kinds of things that can be said about what atheism is and all that kind of stuff. But the real point I think that this is getting at is it's assuming a category error. That the God of the Bible is the exact same kind of belief, same kind of entity. Christianity is the same kind of religion as these other religions. But if you, from a small child, you've played those games where you see the pictures and it's like one of these is not like the others. Please circle the one that's different. Well, guess what? Put up the religions of the world. Christianity better be getting circled because it's not the same. Right? Yahweh in Scripture is not the same kind of being and entity as these other gods, as Ra or Zeus or Odin or, name your pick. The God of the Bible is a transcendent creator, sovereign over all of creation and all of nature. Virtually every other God throughout history has been in nature. Many of them are a created being. They can actually point in their mythology back to a point where their deity began to exist, whereas the Christian God is the foundation of existence itself. Right? Other gods are actually tied into nature, their power having to do with the natural order. In Christianity, God created the natural order. Right? And so it just doesn't even measure up. A lot of these gods are basically like, Marvel superheroes. They're souped up humans, but that's not God. God is an entirely separate type of being than humans and than these other gods. Also, Christianity is a different kind of religion. Right? These other gods, these other religions, they talk about how you earn your way. Christianity says you can't earn it. God had to help us. The Bible is not the same kind of book as these other holy books. A lot of religious books are just that. They are mythological writings, writing about supernatural, spiritual, kind of mystical things that you're supposed to believe. The Bible is primarily historical documents. As the authors of the Bible were writing, I don't think that they were sitting down, by and large, they were not sitting down going, I'm going to write a religious text. Right? Here is a holy book. Let me tell you about. No, especially the New Testament. They were writing letters to each other. The bulk of the New Testament is letters. Hey, here, guys, I want to tell you something. Right? Whenever Paul sat down and wrote his letters, he wasn't writing out, he wasn't intending to write a holy book. He's just writing a letter to some people. Right? Whenever the gospel authors, they weren't intending to write down a holy book. They just said, hey, let's record what Jesus said and did. And so, by and large, the Bible is not in the same category of book. And so on and on we can go and just compare, but side by side, you put Christianity to these other religions, one of these is not like the others. And so to just simply say, oh, well, you doubt all these other religions, why don't you doubt this one? And you apply the same kind of standard. Because in the question, the questioner made the comment that, these other believers, they have the same convictions and evidence that you do. No, they don't. No, they absolutely do not. Christianity has way different kinds of evidence, ton more evidence, right? You stack up the holy books between Christianity and these other religions. Which one has more evidence? Christianity. You stack up the verifiable historical events that happened. Which ones can actually be confirmed? These other religions or Christianity? Christianity, right? Over and over again, you match up what actually lines up with how we experience reality and gets life right. These other religions or Christianity? Christianity, whenever you look at Christianity, what we see as opposed to other religions is that history corroborates it. Even science in certain areas backs it up. Right? Philosophical arguments practically demand that it be true. And Christianity is like the cornerstone. It's like the central foundational block that just makes sense of reality. It's that main puzzle piece that brings it all together and goes, this makes sense now. And so just because you were born somewhere that you happen to believe Christianity, where you were taught Christianity is true, that has no influence on whether or not it actually is true. You go look at the evidence, you go look at the arguments, you go look at what is out there. Trust but verify. Hey, you were raised to believe Christianity is true. So believe it's true. You don't have to discard your belief in order to go investigate. You can trust but verify. That's a perfectly legitimate way of approaching it. And just because you already believe something doesn't automatically mean that you're a warped and twisted, biased individual who can't evaluate the evidence. Try to keep an open mind. Go check out the evidence, and you will see that Christianity is true. It actually, stacked up against these other religions, comes out head and shoulders and then some above the rest.
God is all-powerful and all-loving. Why does he require blood in order to grant forgiveness? Old Testament or New, something had to die before he could forgive anyone. Human beings can forgive each other without there being a death first. Why can't God?
If God is all-powerful and all-loving, why does he require blood for forgiveness? Humans can forgive each other without there needing to be someone dying, so why can't God? There's a few things that are wrong with this. First off, this is very similar to another question, and you can go find that one, refer to it. But there's this idea of forgiveness. Why couldn't God just forgive? Right? We forgive each other, but the fact is we don't just forgive each other. There is a cost involved in forgiveness. For you to say, don't worry about it, I'm letting it go, that means you take the cost of the offense on yourself. And that's what God does. He forgives. Human offenses don't generally rise to the level of death being required as payment, right? And so there's not death needed in the payment, of the cost of the offense. But with sin, I think it does, because again, as mentioned in another question, there's a lot of overlap in these things. A lot of the misunderstandings that people have are pretty general. And if you get these, it'll really help you. Sin is serious, right? Why couldn't God just forgive it? Because sin is serious. Well, it's no big deal. Yes, it is. To God, sin is a very serious thing. And the earned punishment of sin, according to Scripture, according to God, who created everything, the one you're sinning against, what your sin costs is death. Romans 6, for the wages of sin is death. So if death is what you owe, then the payment is death. And if you're not paying it, someone has to. Forgiveness always bears a cost. Just because you forgive does not make the cost go away. Right? If you break my window, I might forgive you, but I still have a window to replace. There is still the cost. And so God might forgive your sin, but your sin requires a payment, and that payment is death. So even if you're forgiven, someone else has to die. The payment must be made.
If you've never been to the ends of the earth, if you've never been to every planet, if you've never been to the corners of the universe, how do you know other gods don't exist?
If you have never been to every place in the world or the universe, how do you know other gods do or do not exist? This was a bizarre question. And how do you know, if you haven't checked under every rock and every stone in every place and examined every single little thing, how can you know something? Because the evidence I do have points me to it. That's pretty simple. This right here is a level of skepticism that eats your brain. Right? This is like so open-minded your brains fall out. I don't understand how this can be something. I'm sorry. I know I'm being a little. If you're honestly feeling struggling with this, I'm not meaning to be insulting or offensive, but this is a level of rationality that this should not be something that drives your thinking or belief on what is or is not true. Let's just look at simple logic, okay? If you have not examined everywhere, how could you know these other gods don't exist? Well, because let's say you have religions A through Z. All of these religions have mutually exclusive claims. If one of them is true, the others cannot be. Okay? Christianity teaches Jesus is God incarnate, crucified and risen again. And the only way for forgiveness. Well, okay, religions B through Z teach otherwise. They can't both be true. So if you have good reason to believe that Christianity is true, then all the others must logically be false. Okay, all religions A through Z, such that if A is true, the rest must be false. So if A is true, B through Z must be false. Hey, A is true. Okay, all the other ones are false. Well, you haven't examined everything and everywhere to know they don't exist. No, this one's true. If I have every reason to believe this one is true, those must be false. I don't need to go examine them. I don't have to go look everywhere. I just look at what I have. This is true. That can't be. So that's how you know. That's why, just because you haven't overturned every stone and been to every corner of the universe to examine if there are other gods out there. Because I know this God's true. And if that one's true, these others can't be. Simple deduction. That's how you know.
There are thousands of other religions out there, many of which have millions of followers. So according to your logic and theirs, anyone who is a blasphemer to your particular deity is going to be condemned, whether it is to go to hell or to be reincarnated as a less intelligent animal. If your God is true, why is it that he would even allow the minds of humans to be so easily deceived into believing other religions? He essentially would have created brains that can be fooled and ultimately will send these people down to hell. In addition, how do you know you're not one of the people who have been fooled?
There's something going on here that I think isn't being considered, And that is that in order to consider that, or as you consider whether or not something is true, you have not only the available evidence, but you also have your standard of examining and judging whether or not that evidence supports the conclusion. So let's say you have an idea. Let's just call it idea, I, or X. X is the common one. Let's go with X. So you have idea or belief X. Well, you're going to have the evidence for X, but then you're going to have the way that you have determined that that evidence needs to be judged in order to claim whether or not X is actually true. It's not exactly breaking news to anyone that people can be unwilling, an act of the will, a choice, unwilling to acknowledge that something is true, regardless of there being obvious evidence to other people. I mean, all you have to do is turn on the news and you see occasions of people who are making claims, commentators who are saying things that you're sitting there going, what are you talking about? Here's the evidence. Here's what's going on. How do you not see this? Right? It happens all the time. This is not exactly a new thing. Since there's been people, at least since Adam and Eve, after the garden, right? There have been people who get it wrong, who willingly get things wrong. There's such a thing as cognitive dissonance. There's such a thing as confirmation bias, right? These are acts of the will that say, I'm going to believe this and hold on to it. There's also this idea that how we examine the evidence actually matters, right? So the idea is, why does God let us be fooled, right? Did he give us faulty intelligences? No, he didn't. He gave us reasoning faculties. He gave us logic. He gave us the ability to reason, but he also gave us free will. So we have a choice in how this goes down, right? Mankind has a third step in the reasoning process that animals don't have. Right? And so you have stimulus and response. This happens, this conclusion. This happens, this action. But humans have that middle step. This happens, think about it. Okay, conclusion. Now it's right in here in this part where we get to insert our will, our choice to say, how am I going to examine and respond to this? How we reason about something is something that we choose to do or not do, as some cases are. For instance, there are plenty of people who believe in a notion that is commonly referred to as scientism, right? They believe that the only basis for true knowledge is scientific, that unless you can demonstrate something scientifically, you should not believe it's true. Well, the only problem with that is that notion itself cannot be scientifically demonstrated. How do you scientifically prove that you must scientifically prove something in order for it to be true? You can't. The whole idea itself just falls apart. It's called self-defeating. It's illogical. But there's still plenty of people that believe it. So here they have their faulty standard, an irrational, failed, self-defeating standard. But they still have it. They choose it, they like it, they keep it. For whatever reason, they have accepted it, and then they use that to view the evidence to determine if something is true. Well, if you've accepted a faulty standard, you're not going to come to right conclusions. So how do you know that you're not one of the people being fooled? Well, I don't. Maybe I am. Maybe I just completely got this whole thing wrong, right? But all I can do is all I can do. All I can do is what everyone else can do. And that's all any of us can do, is to take the best approach we can to make sure we have a good judge and standard of the evidence, that we try to eliminate as much bias as we can as we examine the evidence to determine what's true. If you stop and think about this idea that you should somehow doubt because, hey, maybe you're one that's been fooled, right? Hey, all these other people get it wrong. Maybe you got it wrong. Oh no, I need to stress and freak out and doubt about that. Well, you wouldn't be able to leave your house. If that was your default way of thinking, if you had such a hyper-skepticism about everything that you were questioning, maybe I'm wrong because other people disagree, you'd be able to leave your house. Actually, probably wouldn't even have a house. You'd be institutionalized because you'd be so freaked out, anxious about everything all the time. You couldn't be a productive member of society and take care of yourself because you couldn't make any decisions. It's just not a rational way of approaching the world. How do you know you're not being fooled? I don't know, maybe I am being fooled, but I do what I can to try to eliminate my biases, look at the evidence, make sure I'm judging it correctly. And when I come to the conclusion, if I am convinced that my analysis method is correct, the evidence supports it, then I believe it. Because what else am I going to do? Everything points to it being true. So unless or until you can introduce new evidence or show me my standard is wrong, I have really no choice but to believe it. It's the same thing with Christ. Hey, you know what? There's these other people out there that believe something else. And if you think they're wrong, well, then they've been fooled. But if they've been fooled, how do you know you haven't been fooled? Because if you have no reason to doubt your method of examining the evidence and you don't have any evidence to tell you you're wrong, that means what you're believing should be accepted as the truth. And so if you as a Christian, you're saying, hey, you know what? I've got this evidence for Christianity. I've got the Bible, which is reliable, and I've got my relationship with Christ, everything going on. And, as I'm looking at all this stuff, it means it's true. Well, there's these other people that have a different belief. Maybe they're the ones that are right and you're wrong. Well, maybe. But show it. Don't just claim it. Because right now, what I have says Christianity is true. And if you want that to be doubted, you need to bring something. And that's how we need to address it. That's how we need to view it. I believe this is true. Well, what about? Well, what about? What about doesn't actually get you anywhere. What you need to do is to say, no, okay, here is what I believe is true. Well, what about? No, not what about. Here's what I believe is true. You need to either find a way to correct my standard of judging the evidence, show me different evidence that leads to a different conclusion, or else I'm still finding this to be the case. This should not be a reason for a Christian to doubt. Well, other people believe things too. Yeah, they do. But why do you believe what you believe? Don't worry about what they believe and whether or not they've been fooled. Think about what you believe. Do you believe based on sound reasoning and good evidence? Well, yeah, I think so. Okay, then. Be secure in your belief.
Truth doesn't fear curiosity, testing, or doubt, which inoculate us against charlatans and scams. But if your beliefs stand up to scrutiny, then why is doubting Thomas vilified as the bad guy for utilizing the scientific method, while the rest of the disciples are congratulated for following like blind sheep?
Okay, first off, this question is just packed full of emotionally loaded wording. It's not a useful question. And if that's the kind of things that's kind of pulling you away and causing anxiety in you as emotionally loaded questions, then you need to take a step back. You need to ask yourself, why do I believe? Because if you're believing just for emotional reasons, and someone can stir up some emotions, make you believe, well, then you're not actually believing. You don't actually think it's true, it just kind of feels good. And feelings do not define reality. So let's back up from that for a second. But let's actually look at the question now. Okay, because the question is saying that you should not fear curiosity. I don't fear curiosity. Curiosity is fabulous. I want people curious. Whenever you got hands going up in Bible study, whenever you've got people leaning forward and paying attention during a sermon, I love it. They're curious. They want to know. My primary function as a pastor, I feel as I approach, maybe it's just my mindset, is as a teacher. Years ago, tutoring in college, I got addicted to that moment where a light goes off, ding, and somebody gets it. I want curiosity. As a youth pastor, whenever I would have groups that were just like, okay, and they weren't really interested, it's like, oh, nails on a chalkboard, come on. Get some curiosity. Curiosity is a fabulous thing. Testing, yes, make sure that what you believe is true. Doubt. Now, doubt is not a virtue. Skepticism, you just need to toss that out the window. All right, critical thinking, yes. Reason, yes. Doubt's a feeling. Doubt is an emotion. You doubt something, you start to go, oh no, anxiety, not sure if that's true. It's normal, it's natural, it happens. You actually can't stop yourself from doubting. It just kind of comes along. So it's not a bad thing as long as you react to it correctly. Okay, now, if Christianity can actually stand up to these things, right, then why is doubting Thomas vilified? for the scientific method. Well, he didn't use the scientific method, first off. Scientific method wasn't invented for several, centuries after, quite a long time. Doubting Thomas, well, he just doubted, right? His friends told him something unbelievable to him, and he goes, guys, I'm going to need more than just your word. That's not a scientific method. That's just someone going, that doesn't seem right to me. I'm going to need more. So Jesus gave him more. He wasn't vilified for it. Jesus said, hey, you know what? Here, look, let me show you. Here's the holes in my wrist. See my side? Yeah, it's me. I'm here, Thomas. He wasn't vilified. He actually is one of the apostles, went forward spreading the gospel around the world. And then it paints the other apostles as being praised for being blind sheep. They're not believing for no reason. This is just really weird that people would read into the Bible that Thomas was a villain and the apostles just believe like blind sheep and are being praised for believing like blind sheep. The Bible does not praise blind sheep. That's not something that is actually praised. The Bible is full of, it's thick with reason and explanation and argument. All through the Old Testament, every step of the way, God is constantly pointing back and saying, look what I did in the past. You can trust me now. Hey, people of Israel, here's my promise, and you know I'm good for it because look what I did. Remember your fathers, remember the past generation, remember when I brought you out of Egypt, remember when I parted the Red Sea, remember whenever I did that, remember whenever I did that. Hey, trust me now because of what I did. That's not just have faith. That's not blind faith. That's reason being given to trust. That's what faith is. Faith is trust. And it's the reason to trust is constantly being pointed back to in the Bible. In Hebrews 11, the faith chapter in the Bible, it gives a list of people who are considered faithful heroes of Scripture. And every single one of them had reasons they believed. None of them were just blind faith. You have Rahab, who was a Canaanite. She was a prostitute in the city of Jericho, but she tells the spies, hey, we've heard what God did for you with the Egyptians and how he has given you victory in these other nations that came against you. We're all terrified of your God. So I'm going to help you. Her act of faith was believing in God and helping the spies. And she did that because of the evidence of what God had done for the Israelites. And on it goes. Every single one of them, if you go through that list, it says this person was faithful, and you go back and you look at their story, they weren't believing for no reason. They had their reasons to believe. You go to Acts 17. In Acts 17, I think it's 3 different cities that it records Paul going to. And every time he comes to one, he doesn't go in and go, hey guys, Jesus is the Messiah, just have faith. He says, hey guys, Jesus is the Messiah, let me show you why. And he gives them argument and reason and evidence. Over and over and over again. Whether he's talking to Jews or Gentiles, he's giving arguments and reason and evidence. He's not just asking for blind faith. The Bible doesn't tell us to have blind faith. The apostles don't go forth with blind faith. Even in the 2 Gospels, Luke and John, both authors of Luke and John explicitly state, hey, the reason I'm writing this is so you can know this is true. Have some evidence. That's not blind faith. So this idea that Christianity celebrates blind faith and vilifies people who would question or doubt is just not true. And if that's the religion that you have been brought up in, Christian, my plea to you is that if that is the church you've been brought up in, if that's the culture of the church that you have been in, find a new church. God does not fear your questions. God does not fear your doubts. If you have questions, bring them to God. If you have questions, seek them out. The Scripture does not tell you believe for no reason.
In most sections of Christian theology, there's typically one of 2 afterlives you'll get into when you die. There might be different subsects of this, but generally speaking, there are these main 2 ones, heaven or hell. So my question would be, why would you want either of those? Let me lay it out. You can either go to heaven and have no free will, or you can go to hell and burn forever. Take your pick. If you go to heaven, everything's happy at all times, which means you're not allowed to feel sadness. You'll be worshiping God until the end of days, and there's going to be no end of days, so it's going to keep going forever and ever, which means you effectively have no will of your own. You are forced to worship this deity until who knows when. Now, if you go to hell, then you're going to be burning forever, but at least you have your free will. In neither of these are you given a choice or a chance to be anything but what you will be shaped and molded into. In both of these, you will effectively be a slave, whether you have your free will and you're burning and tortured, or you have no free will and thus are effectively stuck in unending servitude. I don't believe either of these places exist, and I have no reason to believe either of these places exist, but it seems that a lot of Christian theists want these places to exist. And my question would have to be, why? Both of them sound absolutely abysmal.
Now, this question on heaven and hell was a very bizarre question. I'm not really sure how to address the perception of the afterlife that this person has. So rather what I'm going to do is just kind of flesh out how I believe it should be viewed. And so rather than whatever image this person is seeing, wherever it is that you got your idea of heaven and hell, I'm sorry, someone has done you a disservice. This is not heaven and hell as painted in the Bible, in the Christian framework of the view of reality. So let me just set the stage of two very, very key issues that you need to understand in order to have a right view of this issue. Number one, what is the chief kind of issue, the problem between man and God that heaven and hell are part of the resolution? And that is sovereignty. God is sovereign, man wants to be. And so the whole wrestling thing with mankind throughout all of history has been us in rebellion against God. That we don't want him to be king. We don't want him to tell us what to do. We don't want to do things his way. That we want our way. And we don't want to bow the knee. Thank you for your creation, but please leave us alone. Have a nice day. Goodbye, God. So that is kind of the situation that mankind finds ourselves in. Then there's also the idea that Christianity teaches the world is broken. Things do not function as they should. We do not want things as we should want. We have selfishness and pride and corruption and desires that we shouldn't even be there, that are not part of our design, that are aberrations and corruptions and perversions of the way God made the world and made mankind to function. And in heaven, all of that gets put right. And so if we take a look at heaven and hell based on looking at through that lens of the situation, then in the afterlife, all of those people who say, Lord, I will not bow the knee. I do not want you to be king. I want to be in charge of my life. No God, no sovereign. Thank you very much. Then God says, okay, you go over here in this place called hell. Now we could talk about what, the fire and what that means, but there's the torment and everything. I think a lot of that is largely symbolic. Talking about the place where the worm dies not, and there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, and it's a place of fire, and it's a place of darkness. I think a lot of that has to do with imagery trying to convey this is not a place you want to be. But I think that we get a picture of what it'll be like in the time of the world before the flood, where it says that all the intentions of the thoughts of man was only evil continually. No one was wanting to do any good things. I think Sodom and Gomorrah is another image of this. I think to some degree, the time of the judges where it says that everyone just did what was right in his own eyes in Israel. I think that's maybe like a little snapshot taste of what hell might be like. The only difference is in hell, you've made your decision, that's where you're at. So there's never going to be a judgment on the wicked. There's never going to be a cleansing to let good flourish again. There's never going to be a king that sets up righteous order in the kingdom. And so that is what hell is. And so whenever you talk about freedom, technically you might have free will to want what you want, but you can't necessarily do what you want because the restraining providential hand of God has been removed. We've said, hey, we don't want you, God, and God says, okay, well then off you go where I'm not going to be running things. And then that is what hell is, the absence of the presence of God and his grace and his provision and his restraining hand. Heaven, on the other hand, is the place where all that is broken, all that has gone wrong in the world and in our hearts has been restored, has been healed, and now we get to enjoy life as God designed it to be. So in that sense, we're way more free than the people in hell, because in heaven, we are going to be able to, we will not be restricted by the restraints of the corruptions and the perversions of our nature and of our spirit. And so therefore, we're free to go do the things that we could not do, that we would not be able to do in a fallen and broken world. Now, a couple of the examples that the person gave of freedoms that would be lacking. One was we're not allowed to be sad. Well, first of all, why would you want to be sad? That's not really that's a bizarre thing. But on the other hand, there's a sense in which we actually are. I don't think there's going to be anything in heaven that is restraining us, restricting us from going and being sad if that's what we want to do. But since everything has been fixed, the brokenness is healed, what is wrong in us has been made right, the situations in this life that stimulate the emotion of sadness, they're going to be gone. So the reasons to be sad won't even be there. So, I mean, are we free to be sad? I think in heaven, yes, absolutely, we will have the freedom to be sad. We just won't have any occasion by which we would be sad. Likewise, when it comes to the worship of God, right? If the picture you're having of worship is just an eternal church service where we all sit around, hold hands, and sing Kumbaya, that's not worship. That's not heaven. Okay, worship is whenever you take something and you make it the utmost in your affections, when it is the greatest and you give it the praise and adoration it is due. So whenever you're in love and that other person just consumes your thoughts and your desires and you want to be with it, you're worshiping. That's worship. So we're going to be worshiping God. And you say that, well, we can't choose to not worship God. Well, in order to not worship God, we would have to actually take God out of the position of the greatest in our affections and put something else there to where we say this is better than God. The only problem is there is nothing that is better than God. And in heaven, with our perceptions, our understandings, our hearts healed and restored, we will understand that. So one comparison, you'll excuse me if it's a little crude, is I've heard about food. What if you had the access to the absolute best gourmet meals that you could possibly ever want? They're just fantastic, fabulous, and you could have that, or you could have a dog poop sandwich. Well, now you're free to go have the dog sandwich. You're free to go over here and eat the mud pie. You're free to go over here and eat this nasty thing. But are you going to? No, you're not. You're going to be, okay, let me see. Here is a turd sandwich, and here is gourmet meals galore. Oh, yeah, here, let me go have the dog poop sandwich. That's not what's going to happen. And in heaven, we have God. We have the essence of being and the grounding of all good and righteousness and all good things. The source of everything that we could want is there with us to enjoy that fellowship and that communion and that relationship. And so, yeah, sure, okay, we may be free to go do something else. We just won't. Because it really is that kind of comparison. And so this idea that heaven and hell, oh, well, you know, these two options, these are bad. Why would you want either one of them to be true? Well, if heaven and hell are what you're picturing it as, I don't want those either. But that's not what heaven and hell actually are.
Both of us believed in God It meant everything to us. It colored how we saw the world. It gave us meaning and it gave us strength.
Then one day, we couldn't. We had questions, we had doubts, and they couldn't be answered.
We searched. We wanted to, and we tried. We struggled to make ourselves believe again. But we couldn't pretend we did without knowing that it was a lie.
So here's our question.
Can a person simply choose to believe in something that they are not convinced of?
If not, and God created our brains to require a certain level of evidence in order to be convinced, why has He chosen to not provide that level of evidence for us?
Even though we both wanted to believe.
Can a person choose to believe in something they're not convinced of? In a way, we can. In a way, we can. This is one application of the word faith. Faith means trust. You're trusting something. Maybe you don't have complete certainty. Maybe you're not totally convinced. But you know what? I'm going to give it a chance. Right? And so I'm going to go ahead with what I do have. I'm not totally sure, but okay, it makes sense. So something like that. And we do this all the time in other areas of life. Right? You have your friends who are going, hey, come on, we're going to this new party, we're going to this new place, we're going to this event, we're going to see this movie, and you're like, I don't want to, that sounds so lame. And what do? No, you're going to have fun. Believe me, just trust me, you're going to have fun. You don't want to go. You're not convinced you're going to have fun. What do? You go anyway. And end up having fun, right? And so we do this all the time. We do this all the time. What if someone were to bring you evidence? Hey, your spouse has been unfaithful. Here's a picture. And it's like a picture of them having, lunch with their ex-boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever that they didn't tell you about. Oh no, they're cheating on me. Okay, well, the evidence isn't conclusive. You're not convinced, though, they're being faithful. But you know what? Based on the other evidence I have, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And I'm going to choose to believe they are not cheating on me. I'm not entirely convinced. But I'm going to choose to say, no, they're being faithful. Or the other way around. I'm not entirely convinced this happened, but I'm going to choose to believe they cheated on me. We do it. We do it all day long in all kinds of different other things. And on and on. So can you believe something you're not convinced of? Yeah, you can. You can be wrong. You can be right. This kind of gets to that idea that is kind of a deterministic viewpoint of knowledge. That we have whatever and we just, boom, we believe it. We have no control over what we believe. I don't think that's true. You can't just go, I'm going to believe it, poof, and your ideas change. No, that might take time to adapt and acknowledge and experience and examine, right? But you can go, I'm not convinced, but I'm going to go with it. And then you get more convinced as time goes on. So I think that kind of can happen. This idea about, again, God creating our brains. This came up in another question. That God created our brains faulty, and the reason we don't believe is because we have faulty brains. Because God gave us all this evidence and we don't believe it, so it must be our brain's fault. It's God's fault. Right? That doesn't make any sense to me. Okay, because we have the way we judge knowledge, the way we actually judge the knowledge and the evidence itself, and then the conclusion. So there's plenty of people who accept false reasoning. I don't know, maybe you're one of them. Maybe I'm one of them, right? It happens. So just because you choose to accept a false reasoning standard doesn't mean God's fault, your brain is faulty. You chose that, God didn't do it. So on that's on us. So that's not God's fault. And according to the Bible, though, all the evidence that we need to believe Christianity is true is already there. Romans 1 talks about the creation, giving us the truth of the existence of the Creator. Romans 2 talks about how our moral conscience points to the moral lawgiver and actually lets us know we're guilty or innocent in front of God. So whenever you're feeling guilty about doing something, that's not just like, I did something bad. No, you're guilty before God. Right? Romans 1, there's a creator. Romans 2, there's morality, and we're guilty. So a lot of this evidence is already there. You go into all the arguments of God, the cosmological, teleological, You examine these things and you go, wow, okay, the evidence is here. Why don't people believe it? Well, as I mentioned to another question that was very similar, you have your way of analyzing, the way of examining evidence. You have the actual evidence, then you have the conclusion. And you can have a problem in either one. So let's say that there is a conclusion that actually is true. It really is true. It's the way the world is. It really is a true conclusion. But you don't believe it. So where's the deficiency? Is it in the evidence? Or is it in your standard of judging the evidence? Which one? And there's got to be one of them, right? Because judgment plus evidence equals conclusion. Well, it's true, but you're concluding it's not. So where's your fault? Well, there's not enough evidence. Well, okay, Bible says there is, so where's your fault? It's in the way you're examining it. I have found that a lot of Christians fall away from the faith, have crises of faith. They start to doubt Christianity and can't find answers because they have been trained into a non-Christian view of the world. Right? That we, in our increasingly secular, materialistic world, that we adopt a way of thinking. It's just saturated in everything all around us, movies and TV and songs and just phrases we use, right? Throughout these videos, whenever I say mind, whenever I say think, I'm pointing where? To my brain. Why? Because the materialistic world tells us that's what makes us think. Not according to Christianity. According to Christianity, our mind is something else. Not encapsulated in our brain, but that's the culture we live in. So I've adopted the gesture, right? Because that's just the culture we live in. That doesn't mean that that's my mind, right? That's just my brain. The point is that there is so much in our thinking, in our vocabulary that comes from views that aren't actually Christian views. And so what happens is we adopt a view, a way of thinking that automatically will not allow for Christianity to be true. So the deck is stacked against Christianity. So we have a viewed way of judging the evidence. Then we look at the evidence, we go, okay, therefore it can't be true. But it is true. So the problem is either with the standard or with the evidence. Well, if the evidence is there for Christianity, what's wrong with the standard? A lot of times our standard is informed by secular thinking, not by actual good, rational, philosophical thinking. So what we need to do is to make sure, okay, am I thinking correctly? Because a lot of times what happens is if you have these materialistic, must be science, must be empirical, just philosophical argument doesn't work, kind of ideas, then you're not going to come to right conclusions. And so you have to actually say, okay, am I processing and evaluating the evidence to come to the correct conclusion? And a lot of times our analysis, our standard of judgment of the evidence is what is flawed, not our brains. God didn't give us faulty brains. He didn't give us broken minds. He gave us intellect. He gave us reason. He expects us to use them, but how we use them is our choice.
Often, creationists will characterize the Big Bang as something magically created from nothing. But then you have creationists who literally believe a supernatural being created the entire universe. Literally something magically from nothing. My question to you is why is the first one irrational but the second one logical?
This was an interesting question because it kind of pits two ideas against each other. I think there's some equivocation going on. I think there's just some, it's a loaded question. There's too much vague. It's like, okay, strip away the actual, kind of way it's being asked and get to the question really underneath the question, right? Because it's saying, hey, creationists will say that the Big Bang was just magically poof, it came out of nowhere and, got created. And then atheists will say, oh, well, creationists, you believe that God just poof, magically did it. Okay, well, here's the difference. Okay, the reason that creationists, and I'm using that broadly, whether it's young earth creationists, old earth creationists, theistic evolutionists, deists, right, whoever, people who think that God created. The reason that creationists will say the Big Bang is just, magic, because what caused it? Right, the whole point of magic is just poof, it just got done. Okay, in the Big Bang, in a naturalistic, atheistic view of the world, the Big Bang is the universe coming into existence. From what? From nothing. It came into existence. What caused it? There was nothing there to cause it. A naturalistic view says nature is all there is. And so if the Big Bang is where nature started, what lit the fuse? There's nothing there. Whatever lit the fuse had to be outside of nature, beyond nature, supernatural. And so that's why creationists will say, you believe in magic. Where did it come from? At least on creation, we have a cause. Right? So even if we believe the Big Bang, well, something had to start it. What lit the fuse? What banged the bang? Right? It's not magic to say that God did it. Well, how did God do it? I don't know. Refer back to that question. It's already been asked. But how did God do it? This is not something that should cause anyone any kind of problems. Right? Oh, well, God just magically did it. Yeah, okay, fine. Magic, if you come comfortable with that word. Whatever processes he used were supernatural processes. I don't know what they were. They weren't part of nature. He made the Big Bang. Boom. Where? How? I don't know. It doesn't matter. But the difference, the key difference in this situation that we need to understand is that these aren't comparable. Oh, well, you're claiming this is magic. We claim that's magic. They're both magic. No, they're not both magic. The real claim is on creation, there is a cause for the universe to start. On atheistic, naturalistic Big Bang models, there's nothing. It just happens from nothing for no reason. And when I say nothing, I don't mean a quantum vacuum. It means nothing. Where'd it come from? Oh, no. Well, okay, fine. If you're comfortable with I don't know. But I actually have evidence to say I do know it was a creator. God did it. That's not a God of the gaps. We have reason and evidence. But that's a different question. The point here is that it's not the same thing whenever someone who believes in a creator says that Big Bang is just magic, right? The two are not comparable. That's the point. The two are not comparable. Atheistic, naturalistic Big Bang has no cause. Creation has a cause. Which one's rational? Nothing created something or something created everything?
We atheists get asked all the time what the basis of our morality is. It's as if because we don't have some holy book or we don't worship a god, we have no true way of having a moral compass. Call me crazy, but I don't think you have to have the promise of heaven to see that doing good is just good. Well, the basis for my morality is simple. I believe that doing the most good and the least harm benefits not only me, but those around me. I believe that things like kindness and love and laughter benefit not only me, but those around me. However, I also believe that things like judgment, condemnation, and a willful ignorance to follow something that has no basis set in reality or backed up by evidence is ultimately harmful. And not only to me, but to those around me. So for my question, I'd like to turn the tables. What's the basis for your morality? Is it the Bible? Is it really the Bible? That same Bible that doesn't condemn slavery or rape. Instead, it says things like, if your daughter is raped, she should marry her attacker. Or, if you're a slave owner, and you find yourself in the situation where your slave is unruly, you are within your right to beat him within an inch of his life. So many scriptures. 66 books. Filled with thousands of pages. Hundreds of thousands of words. But not one of which says that rape or slavery is morally wrong.
Okay. Now let's just start out by saying that this idea, your conception of what the Bible says about slavery and rape is just completely wrong. I don't even want to get into that in this video because it's really kind of a side distraction from the real point. But you really need to go explore that. I know that myself and some of the other mentionables touch on this issue in other areas, other material in our ministry. I encourage you to go check those out. But no, the Bible does not say that a woman can be forced to marry her rapist, and it does not say that a master can beat a slave within an inch of his life. Okay, that's just not what it says. It definitely condemns rape. It definitely condemns slavery. Go check it out. Now, on this issue of morality and a basis for morality, I think the questioner misses the point altogether. Whenever someone asks, what is your basis for morality, we're not just asking what your opinion of morality is. Right? We're asking, where do you actually get this objective standard by which humanity must live? That's what morality is. Morality has an obligation to it. There's obligatory power. There is a you should do A, you should not do B. Where do you get that from? And the answer that was given about, well, I believe harm and benefit. No, well, what do you mean by harm? What do you mean by benefit? What do you mean by good? Where do you get these ideas? What establishes these things as objective features of reality? That is what is being asked for. See, because you have to eventually hit a bedrock foundation principle that is just the way reality is. Where do you get that from? That is what the question is asking. On atheism, you don't have that. There is nothing that you can point to. Because morality, a moral standard, a statement of what is right or what is wrong, it only comes from two places. It's either objective, it exists out there as a feature of reality outside of mankind. Or it comes from, it's subjective, it comes from human ideas or human creation. Whether it is just your opinion because what you like, or whether it is a social construct based on what helps society at that time achieve their goals, or whether it is an evolutionary imperative that's just kind of wired into us. Either way, the source of the morality is from within human beings. But that doesn't make it right or wrong objectively. That has no obligation power to it. Right? This was the defense of the Nazis after World War II, saying, hey, look, you can't judge our culture. We were just doing what our culture, our values, our principles told us we were supposed to do. And if you do not have some foundational bedrock standard of morality outside of human beings that can stand over disagreements and adjudicate, then that's not really morality, it's just your opinion. That is what is being asked for when someone says, what's your basis for morality? What is the foundation? What is the thing that actually makes it true and obligates us to follow it? See, in your answer, you didn't give that. And that's what Christians are asking. It's what atheists lack. And in Christianity, the Bible is not our basis for morality. It's a medium that communicates. It's a message telling us about morality, but the morality itself is grounded in the nature and character of God and his design for creation. That's the basis for morality. That's how it is an objective feature of reality in the world in which we live. Murder isn't wrong just because the Bible says thou shalt not murder. Right? Murder is wrong for other reasons, and the Bible communicates it to us. And so this question, from start to finish, just completely misunderstands the whole idea of what is being talked about in the morality issue and the role the Bible plays and even what the Bible says.
Every time I feel the walls closing, you cover me and breathe life in me again. Lord, though I feel the darkness come, I will not fear, you've ransomed me with blood.